I'm Dr. Evelyn Reed, 29, female. I live in a modest downtown apartment with my rescue greyhound, Gus. By training, I'm a veterinarian, a passion I've pursued since I was a child. But for the past 3 months, I've been living a double life, swapping my scrubs for a simple intern badge at my father's company, Reed Global Enterprises. I thought the hardest part of this undercover assignment would be fetching coffee and pretending I didn't understand complex financial models, but I was wrong. The hardest part was discovering the rot that had festered right under my family's nose, and the person who revealed it all did so with a single, dismissive command. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My father, Arthur Reed, built his empire from the ground up. Reed Global was a leader in sustainable agriculture and veterinary pharmaceuticals, a legacy he intended for me to one day inherit. But there was a problem. He didn't want me to be the distant, out-of-touch heir who only saw the company through boardroom presentations. He wanted me to understand its heartbeat, its people, its problems. His solution was unconventional. I would spend 6 months as Eva Smith, a nameless, faceless intern in the operations division, reporting directly to its vice president, David Sterling. The plan was simple: no special treatment, no winks from executives who knew my real identity, and only 2 of them did, my father and the head of HR. I was given a dusty cubicle in a forgotten corner of the 34th floor, a stack of mind, numbing spreadsheets to format, and an intern's salary that barely covered my rent. It was humbling, to say the least. My life went from performing complex surgeries on animals to making sure David Sterling's PowerPoint presentations had uniform font sizes. The first few weeks were a blur of corporate jargon and lukewarm coffee. I kept my head down, observed everything, and spoke only when spoken to. I learned more in those weeks than in any business class. I saw the quiet struggles of the junior staff, the ambitious maneuvering of the mid-level managers, and the casual entitlement of the senior executives. David Sterling was the epitome of that entitlement. He was a charismatic man on the surface, the kind who remembered your name just long enough to ask for a favor. But I saw the way he dismissed valid concerns from his team and took credit for their successes. He treated me, his intern, as something less than a ghost. I was a function, not a person. My purpose was to make his life easier, and he never let me forget it. If he passed me in the hallway, his eyes would slide right over me. He'd leave files on my desk without a word and expect them to be completed perfectly by the time he returned. My only real friend in this corporate maze was Ben Carter, a junior analyst in the finance department. He was sharp, kind, and one of the few people who bothered to ask my name on the first day. We'd often eat lunch together in the sterile cafeteria, complaining about our workloads. He didn't know who I was, of course. To him, I was just Eva, the quiet intern who seemed a little too old to be doing coffee runs. "He's a piece of work, isn't he?" Ben said one afternoon, nodding towards David's glass, walled office. David was laughing loudly with another VP, oozing a confidence that I knew was unearned. "He certainly has a presence," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "Presence, Eva, the guy is a textbook narcissist." Ben muttered, stabbing at his salad. "He runs his department on fear and favors. Be careful around him." I knew Ben was right. I had seen David's temper flare over a minor typo, and I had heard the whispers about his lavish spending on the company's dime. Expenses he always managed to justify as networking or client relations. My father had suspected something was amiss in the operations division. Its budget had been ballooning for 2 years with no corresponding increase in productivity. That was the real reason I was here. I wasn't just learning the ropes. I was a silent auditor, a pair of eyes on the inside. I was looking for the source of the rot, and I had a feeling it started at the very top of the department. The incident that changed everything happened on a sweltering Tuesday in July. The office air conditioning was struggling, and tempers were short. David Sterling had been in back-to-back meetings all morning, making him even more irritable than usual. I was tasked with compiling a massive expense report for him, a tedious job that involved sorting through a mountain of receipts for extravagant dinners, 5-star hotels, and consulting fees from companies I'd never heard of. Around noon, a woman swept into the office like a conquering queen. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a designer suit, with a glacial expression that suggested she found the very air in our part of the office substandard. This was Jessica Sterling, David's wife. I had seen her picture on his desk, but in person, her aura of self-importance was suffocating. She didn't work for the company, yet she carried herself as if she owned it. She marched directly to David's office, not bothering to acknowledge his executive assistant, and disappeared inside. A few minutes later, she emerged, holding a thin folder. David followed, looking flustered. He was pointing at me, a lazy, dismissive gesture. "She can do it," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "She's just the intern." Jessica's eyes, cold and assessing, landed on me. She walked over to my cubicle, the click, clack of her heels a drumbeat of impending doom. She didn't greet me or introduce herself. She simply slapped the folder down on my desk, scattering a neat pile of papers I had just organized. "David needs these invoices processed for immediate payment," she announced, her voice dripping with condescension. "They're for the new office renovations, my design firm." I opened the folder. Inside were 3 invoices totaling just over $200,000. They were from Sterling Designs, her own company. The descriptions were vague: consultation services, material sourcing, project management, and the amounts were perfectly round numbers, a classic red flag in accounting. I knew company policy. Any invoice over $50,000 required a detailed project proposal, multiple bids, and approval from the chief financial officer. Anything involving a potential conflict of interest, like hiring your spouse's firm, required an additional ethics review. This folder had none of that. It just had a single yellow sticky note on the top invoice with David's sloppy signature scrawled on it. "I can submit these to accounts payable," I said politely, "but for this amount, they'll need CFO approval and supporting documentation." Jessica scoffed, a short, ugly sound. She looked at me as if I were a bug she had just found on her expensive shoe. "Listen to me," she said, leaning in so close I could smell her cloyingly sweet perfume. "My husband is the VP. His signature is all the approval you need. I don't have time to wait for the bean counters to do their little dance." She tapped a manicured finger on a line at the bottom of the first invoice. "There's a line here for departmental pre-approval. Just sign it." My blood ran cold. She wasn't asking me to submit the invoices. She was telling me to countersign them, to add my name to this blatantly fraudulent document. As an intern, my signature held no real authority, but it would serve its purpose. It would create a paper trail that started with me. If anyone ever questioned this, they would come to the lowly intern first, the one who blindly followed orders. David and Jessica would have plausible deniability. It was a classic corporate power play, using the most powerless person in the room as a shield. "I'm not comfortable signing an invoice I can't verify," I stated, my voice firmer than I intended. A flicker of genuine shock crossed her face, quickly replaced by rage. She straightened up, looking down her nose at me. "You're not paid to be comfortable. You're paid to do as you're told." She pushed the folder closer to me, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Sign it, intern." That was it. That was the moment. The condescension, the blatant corruption, the sheer audacity of it all. She hadn't just insulted my intelligence. She had insulted the integrity of the company my father had spent his life building. In her eyes, I wasn't a person. I was a tool, a rubber stamp with a pulse, and she had no idea who she was talking to. I looked at her, then down at the invoice. I picked up my pen. For a split second, she smirked, thinking she had won. But I didn't sign the document. Instead, I clicked my pen shut and looked her straight in the eye. "No," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I don't think I will." The air in the cubicle farm grew thick with tension. My flat refusal hung between us, a declaration of war. Jessica Sterling's face, a carefully constructed mask of bored superiority, crumbled into disbelief, then pure fury. Her cheeks flushed a blotchy red, and her perfectly shaped lips tightened into a thin, ugly line. "What did you just say to me?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. A few of my nearby colleagues, who had been pretending to work, were now frozen, their eyes wide. I said no. I repeated, standing up so we were at eye level. I was several inches taller than her, a fact that seemed to further enrage her. "These invoices are irregular. They lack the required documentation for a transaction of this size, and they represent a clear conflict of interest. Processing them, let alone signing them, would be a violation of corporate policy." David, who had been watching from a distance, hurried over. "Is there a problem here, Jessica?" he asked, trying to sound authoritative but failing to hide the nervousness in his eyes. "Your intern," Jessica spat, pointing a trembling finger at me, "is refusing to do her job." David turned to me, his expression a mixture of annoyance and impatience. "Eva," Just do what she says. It's fine. I've approved it. With all due respect, sir, I said, my gaze unwavering, your signature isn't enough to bypass the company's financial controls. This needs to go through the proper channels. The proper channels. David let out a short, incredulous laugh. I am the proper channels in this department. Now, are you going to sign that paper, or do I need to call security to escort you out of the building for insubordination? The threat was clear. My time as Eva Smith was about to come to an abrupt end, but they had already given me what I needed. Her blatant demand and his open threat confirmed that this wasn't just a one-time shortcut. This was a pattern of behavior. This was how they operated. They believed they were above the rules. I held my ground. Then you'll have to call them. I said. The entire floor was silent now. Ben was staring at me from his desk, his expression a mix of terror and awe. David's face purpled with rage. He was about to explode when Jessica put a hand on his arm, a wicked little smile playing on her lips. Don't bother, darling, she said sweetly. Let the little girl have her principles. She won't have a job by the end of the day anyway. She snatched the folder off my desk. I'll have your assistant handle this. At least she knows her place. With a final withering glare at me, she turned and stormed off, David trailing in her wake like a frustrated puppy. As soon as they were gone, the office erupted in hushed whispers. Ben immediately rushed over to my cubicle. Eva, are you crazy? He whispered, his eyes wide. They'll fire you for that. They'll blacklist you. Maybe, I said, my heart still pounding in my chest. But it was the right thing to do. The right thing doesn't pay your rent, he countered, though a part of him seemed to admire my defiance. Look, just go apologize, say you were stressed, make something up. I shook my head. It's too late for that, Ben, and honestly, I'm not sorry. The rest of the afternoon was agonizingly slow. Every time a phone rang, I expected it to be HR summoning me to my execution. David remained locked in his office, and I could occasionally hear his raised voice through the glass. I did my best to look busy, but my mind was racing. That invoice folder was the key. It was proof, but now Jessica had it. Then I remembered something. When Jessica had slapped the folder on my desk, a few papers had slipped out. I had tucked them back in, but had I seen everything? I knelt down beside my desk, pretending to tie my shoe and scan the floor. There, hidden under the leg of my chair, was a single sheet of paper that must have fluttered away unnoticed. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. It wasn't an invoice. It was a quote, a preliminary bid from a legitimate, well-known construction firm for the same office renovation project. It was dated 2 months prior. The total cost was itemized in painstaking detail labor, materials, permits. The grand total was just under $70,000. Jessica's invoice had been for over $200,000. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a conflict of interest anymore. This was blatant, large-scale fraud. They weren't just hiring her firm, they were using it to inflate the cost by nearly 3 times the market rate and pocketing the difference. The document in my hand was the proof I needed, the one piece of paper they had overlooked in their arrogance. They thought they were punishing a powerless intern. They had no idea they had just handed the keys to their own destruction to the one person who could bring the entire corrupt structure crashing down. I carefully folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. My undercover mission had just become a criminal investigation. I knew I had to act fast. David would make good on his threat to fire me, and once I was out of the building, my access to the company's network would be gone. I had maybe a few hours tops. After the confrontation, I kept my head down, pretending to be chastened and defeated. David and Jessica wanted to believe they had crushed the defiant intern, and their arrogance was my best cover. When 5 o'clock rolled around, I packed my bag like everyone else, but instead of heading for the elevator, I went to find Ben. He was still at his desk, looking worried. Hey, I said softly, are you busy tonight? Eva, He started, looking conflicted. I don't think it's a good idea for me to be seen with you. If David thinks I'm on your side, I understand. I cut in, but I need your help, Ben. This is bigger than just me getting fired. I think David is stealing from the company a lot. I showed him the quote I'd found. As a financial analyst, he understood its significance instantly. His eyes widened as he compared the $70,000 figure to the $200,000 I told him Jessica had invoiced. No way, he breathed. This is a massive overcharge. Sterling Designs must be a shell company to launder the money. Exactly, I said. I need to prove it. I need to find other projects, other invoices. There has to be a pattern. Your financial systems access. Could you look up vendor payments to Sterling Designs over the last couple of years? Ben hesitated. What I was asking him to do was a serious breach of protocol. He could lose his job, and unlike me, he didn't have a safety net. I looked him in the eye. Ben, safety net. I looked him in the eye. Ben, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. People's jobs, the health of this company, it's all at stake. If he's doing this, who knows what else he's doing? After a long, tense moment, he nodded slowly. Okay, he said, his voice barely a whisper, but we have to be careful. The system tracks everything. We'll do it from my terminal. It will be less suspicious than you accessing financials from an intern login. For the next 3 hours, Ben and I huddled in his cubicle, the glow of his monitor illuminating our anxious faces. The office was quiet except for the hum of the servers and the distant sound of the cleaning crew. With Ben's expertise, we navigated the labyrinthine depths of the company's accounting software. The trail was shocking. Sterling Designs had been an active vendor for the past 2 years, ever since David was promoted to VP. In that time, they had been paid a staggering $4. $3 million for design and renovation of projects. We referenced the project codes with the company's facilities records. Many of the renovations were completely fictitious. A lobby refresh on the 18th floor that never happened. A conference room technology upgrade for a room that hadn't been touched in a decade. For the projects that were real, we found what I suspected, a pattern of wildly inflated costs. Ben pulled up the original, legitimate bids from other vendors, which David had apparently kept on file, likely by mistake. In every single case, the bid from the real company was a fraction of what Sterling Designs had charged. The scam was simple but effective. David would get a real quote for a project. Then he would create a fake, massively inflated invoice from his wife's company, approve it himself, and pocket the difference. He was using Reed Global as his personal ATM. This is insane, Ben whispered, scrolling through page after page of fraudulent transactions. How did the internal auditors not catch this? They probably trusted him, I said grimly. He's a VP. He knows the system, knows the approval thresholds, and knows how to bury things in the budget. And he probably bullies anyone who asks too many questions. We downloaded everything, the invoices, the legitimate quotes, the payment records, the project files. We saved it all to an encrypted USB drive. By the time we finished, it was nearly 10 p.m. The evidence we had was overwhelming, a meticulously documented account of years of systematic fraud. As we were about to log off, Ben found one last thing. It was a pending wire transfer, approved by David that very afternoon, right after his confrontation with me. It was for $250,000, payable to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It was scheduled to go through at 9 a.m. the next morning. He's getting sloppy, Ben said, or maybe he's getting spooked. He's trying to move a large sum of cash out of the country. He's not spooked. I realized, a cold wave of clarity washing over me. He's celebrating. He thinks he just put me in my place and got his big payday approved. He thinks he's untouchable. I held the USB drive in my hand. It felt heavy with the weight of his crimes. The invisible intern now had everything she needed to make the untouchable man disappear. The investigation was over. Now it was time to build the trap. I walked out of Reed Global that night not as a disgraced intern, but as a predator with a target in its sights. Ben and I parted ways in the lobby, a silent understanding passing between us. He had put his career on the line, and I would make sure he was rewarded for it, not punished. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove straight to my father's house. He was in his study poring over quarterly reports. When he saw my face, he immediately knew something was wrong. "Evelyn," he said, his voice laced with concern. "What happened? I didn't waste any time." I sat down, plugged the USB drive into his laptop, and for the next hour, I walked him through everything. The confrontation with Jessica, the fraudulent invoices, Ben's discovery of the years of embezzlement, and the pending wire transfer. I laid out the whole sordid story, backed by the irrefutable data we had collected. My father listened in stony silence, his expression growing darker with every document I showed him. Arthur Reed was a kind man, but he was also a ruthless businessman who had zero tolerance for theft and betrayal. David Sterling wasn't just an employee. My father had mentored him, had trusted him, had given him a position of immense power. This was not just a corporate crime, it was a personal betrayal of the highest order. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring at the screen. Finally, he looked at me, and I saw a glimmer of pride in his weary eyes. "You did well, Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You did exactly what I hoped you would. You found the rot. What do we do now?" I asked. "Do we call the police?" He shook his head. Not yet. A public scandal of this magnitude could damage investor confidence. David is a senior VP. We have to handle this surgically. We need to cut the cancer out without killing the patient. He paused, a strategic glint in his eye. He thinks he's untouchable. Let's let him keep thinking that, just for a little while longer. My father's plan was audacious, and I loved it. It wasn't enough to just fire David Sterling. It wasn't enough to just sue him. We had to make an example of him, to send a message to anyone else in the company who thought they could get away with betraying the trust placed in them. The stage for this lesson would be the quarterly board meeting, scheduled in 2 days. The first call my father made was to the bank, to the personal account manager for the company. He instructed them to put a hold on the $250,000 wire transfer. It wouldn't be rejected just, delayed due to a technical issue. David would get a notification, but he wouldn't panic yet. He'd assume it was a simple glitch. The second call was to our chief legal officer, outlining the situation and instructing him to prepare severance paperwork for David that included a full confession of his crimes, tied to a non-negotiable restitution agreement. He was also to have civil and criminal complaints drafted and ready to file at a moment's notice. My role was to prepare the presentation, not a financial report, but a narrative, the story of David Sterling's fraud from start to finish. I worked through the night, creating a devastatingly clear timeline of his crimes, complete with copies of the fake invoices next to the real quotes, charts showing the flow of money into his wife's shell company, and a final slide detailing the $3 million he had stolen. The plan was set. David would walk into that board meeting expecting a routine discussion of operational performance. He would sit there, smug and secure in his position, having already received an email from HR that morning officially terminating the contract of the insubordinate intern, Eva Smith. He would have no idea that the entire board, my father, and the company's top lawyer were all waiting for him. And he would have no idea that the quiet intern he'd fired was about to walk into that room and personally dismantle his entire life. The gambit was ready. All we had to do was wait for the king to walk into the checkmate. The morning of the board meeting was gray and overcast, a perfect mirror of the storm that was about to break inside the 50th floor boardroom. I arrived early with my father, dressed not as an intern, but as myself, Dr. Evelyn Reed, his daughter and heir. I wore a tailored power suit, my hair was styled professionally, and my demeanor was calm and collected. The few executives we passed in the hallway did a double take, their minds struggling to reconcile the intern they'd ignored for months with the woman standing next to the CEO. David Sterling arrived right on time, striding into the boardroom with a confident smile. He greeted the board members, shook my father's hand, and then his eyes fell on me, seated at the table next to my father's chair. His smile faltered. Confusion flickered across his face. He looked at me, then at my father, then back at me. "Arthur," he said, forcing a jovial tone, "I didn't realize we had a new junior executive joining us." He gestured vaguely at me. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." My father's expression was granite. "On the contrary, David," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "I believe you know my daughter, Evelyn, though you probably know her as Eva Smith." The color drained from David's face. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. The smug confidence vanished, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. He finally understood. "Before we begin with the quarterly reports," and my father continued, his voice cold as ice, "Evelyn has a special presentation on the performance of the operations division." That was my cue. I stood up, took the remote for the projector, and faced the room. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice steady and clear. For the past 3 months, I've had the unique opportunity to observe the operations division from the ground up, and what I've discovered is a story of profound financial mismanagement. I clicked the remote. The first slide appeared on the massive screen behind me. It was a picture of the invoice from Sterling Designs for over $200,000. Next to it was the legitimate $70,000 quote I had found. I could see David start to sweat. For the next 15 minutes, I walked the board through David Sterling's entire scheme. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use emotional language. I simply presented the facts, one damning slide after another. The fake projects, the inflated invoices, the flow of millions of dollars into the shell company owned by his wife. The board members, titans of industry themselves, watched in stunned silence. their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to cold, hard anger. David just sat there, shrinking in his chair, his face a ghastly shade of pale. He didn't say a word. There was nothing he could say. The evidence was absolute. My final slide was a simple summary, a single number. $4, 317, 250, 00. This, I said, turning to look directly at David, is the amount that Mr. Sterling has embezzled from this company over the past 24 months. I sat down. The silence in the room was deafening. All eyes were on David Sterling. My father spoke. David, do you have anything to say in your defense? David swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an ally, for an escape. He found neither. It's a misunderstanding. He stammered, his voice hoarse. My wife's firm does legitimate work. The rates were competitive. My father scoffed. You charged this company $250,000 for a wire transfer to a personal offshore account. A transfer, I might add, that has been frozen pending a federal investigation. That was the final blow. The mention of a federal investigation broke him. David slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. The chief legal officer stepped forward and placed a thick folder in front of him. Mr. Sterling. He said in a formal tone, "This is your termination agreement. It contains a full confession, which you will sign. It also contains a restitution plan, which will require you to liquidate your assets, including your homes and investments, to repay every single cent you stole, if you sign it now. The company will proceed with a civil suit. If you do not, we will file our criminal complaint with the district attorney's office this afternoon. The choice is yours. Jessica Sterling was implicated as a co-conspirator. Her assets would be frozen and seized as well. Their entire empire, built on theft and deceit, was being dismantled in a single morning. David stared at the papers, his hands trembling. He had lost everything, his job, his reputation, his stolen fortune. He picked up the pen. After a moment of hesitation, he began to sign, his signature a weak, shaky scrawl, a pathetic imitation of the arrogant signature he had scrawled on that first fraudulent invoice. The unveiling was complete. The king was dethroned. The aftermath of the board meeting was swift and decisive. As David Sterling was quietly escorted from the building for the last time by security, my father moved to cauterize the wound. An emergency meeting was held with the senior leadership of the operations division. My father announced David's immediate retirement and the launch of a full-scale internal audit to uncover the extent of the damage and identify any systemic weaknesses that had allowed this to happen. There was no public scandal. The story was carefully managed. To the outside world, it was a simple executive shuffle, but inside the company, the message was loud and clear. Accountability was not optional. The culture of fear and entitlement that David had cultivated began to evaporate overnight. My first act was to find Ben Carter. I walked over to the finance department, where he was sitting at his desk, looking like he was expecting a firing squad. When he saw me, he stood up, his face pale. "Evelyn," he said, using my real name for the first time. "I mean Dr. Reed, I smiled. "It's Evelyn, Ben, and you have nothing to worry about." I explained what had happened in the boardroom. The color slowly returned to his face, replaced by a look of profound relief, but more than that. I continued, "I came here with a job offer. The internal audit team needs a lead analyst with integrity and a sharp eye for detail. The position comes with a significant raise and reports directly to the new head of operations." Ben was stunned. "The new head? Who's that? You're looking at her," I said. "I'm taking over as the interim VP. My first job is to clean house, and I want you on my team." The look of gratitude on his face was one of the most satisfying moments of the entire ordeal. He accepted immediately, his career now on a fast track he had earned through his courage. The weeks that followed were intense. We worked with forensic accountants to trace every stolen dollar. The restitution process stripped David and Jessica of their lavish lifestyle. They were forced to sell their mansion, their luxury cars, and their vacation home. They were left with nothing but their debt to the company and their ruined reputations. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica had left him almost immediately, her loyalty apparently only as deep as his bank account. As for me, my 6-month internship had turned into a trial by fire. I was no longer the invisible intern. I was a leader. I promoted talented people who had been overlooked by David. I streamlined wasteful processes, and I fostered a new culture of transparency and respect within the division. I discovered that I had a knack for the business side of things, a skill I never knew I possessed. I still loved being a veterinarian, but I realized my father was right. I could do more for the welfare of animals by ensuring the veterinary pharmaceutical division of our company was run with integrity than I ever could with just a scalpel and a stethoscope. My time as Eva Smith was over. I had entered Reed Global to learn the business, but I ended up saving a part of it. I had faced down bullies and criminals, not with threats or anger, but with quiet competence and undeniable truth. They had tried to use me as a pawn, a signature on a fraudulent document. They never realized that the intern they so carelessly dismissed was actually the queen, and she was about to sweep their pieces right off the board.